From the world of AV programming and control with James King, I'm Steve Greenblatt, and this is Ask the Programmer. Hey, James, I'm glad to be back with you. How are you doing today? And we have an episode just you and I chatting.
Oh, yeah, I'm great to be back here, Steve. And I love having our guests on, but I also enjoy sitting here talking with you as well. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, and I look forward to these types of episodes, as you mentioned, because it's a lot of times you and I get an idea that we're going to go down a certain path, and maybe the conversation goes in another direction. I think, which is what makes, in my mind, this podcast important, because it keeps the topics fresh, but it also gives us validation that they're good topics. And then sometimes we get three or four more that we follow up on. So always great. And today that topic, we're in 2022, and a lot of companies right now are facing product shortages and equipment delays and so forth. So we thought, we were talking a bit about how do you consider looking at new control platforms, and not to say that anybody should be abandoning what they're currently working with, but it starts to get to be an interesting conversation, and it's also very pertinent to programmers. And typically, company gets really invested in a control platform, and programmers, that's how they really build their experience. But I'll kind of let you take the first crack at it, because you can look at it from a couple of different ways, as both a client and a higher ed perspective, but also from a programmer perspective.
So I know many people have heard me say this, and I know it's probably have rubbed some people the wrong way, especially some manufacturers, is I do not have brand loyalty. My loyalty is the students and the university. We have a mission to accomplish. If your product is achieving that mission, then great. I'm going to stick with you as long as you're a good partner. Now, second, you're no longer that good partner, and you're not helping me achieve my mission and my goal for my students and the university, I'm going to find someone who can. So you always need to be evaluating and making sure you're meeting those end goals that you're looking for. Because a lot of times, if you get into brand loyalty, you can get into blinders, and you'll when you have there's a difference between brand loyalty and a good partner. Like to me, a good partner is, yeah, you'll stick with them when the road gets a little bumpy. Brand loyalty is you're going to blindly follow them into the pits. That's the difference between a good partner and loyalty. You can sit with them when the road's bumpy and you're weathering bad storms, but they're not going to take you down a pit, into a pit, where brand loyalty will take you into that pit. So, going back to that, you just want to make sure you're always evaluating, and to be able to make sure you're achieving your goals. So it's really key to make sure you're always evaluating and not getting blinders put on.
I think a lot. I agree with you there, and so many levels, and I think that you shouldn't take a label on a product to mean that it's best in class in different categories. So just because you're best in class in one category doesn't mean that you're best in class in other categories. And the other thing that I think that this situation has probably taught a lot of people is that have your backup plan, and maybe have a backup plan to that too. It's kind of like you do for building a team. You have to know, if you have to make a change, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, that you can have somebody fill in, and that the team doesn't fall apart. So I think it's good, and it's very healthy. Um, a lot of programmers, I think, would argue that um, being changing products often is going to be challenging, And kind of what's your take on that in terms of, obviously you get better with experience and practice, uh, but you also, I think, need to be able to keep your eyes open, as you mentioned before, and not put those blinders on.
You definitely need to keep your eyes open. Is it hard to change? Yes. Changing means we need to step outside our comfort zone. I know for a fact I did evaluate moving to a different platform at my old job. The thing that when you're evaluating that, what's a very important thing to take into consideration is all the hidden costs. So, for example, it might cost you $100, for the to change the software. Let's just say just different software, $100. But the hidden cost to that, training, support, scalability, all that stuff is that it's not built into that initial cost of when you buy the product or move to it, but there's still costs associated to that. So we need, especially as programmers, we need to think about that. Like if we're going to come to our supervisor and go, hey, I want to switch from programming language A to programming language B company. Well, most likely our bosses go, all right, what's the cost? And we just give the surface cost, we're lying to our supervisor, even not knowing it. Because then there's also the hidden costs. And I had that conversation with my supervisor. When we looked at changing products, I said, okay, this is how much it would be like to build a classroom with the different product. But I go, then we got to pay for training. Our support staff doesn't know. Programming wise, like I'm the only one on the staff right now who will be able to adapt to the new language of program. So definitely there's a lot of hidden costs to consider.
And I think from going back to what you said in the beginning, where you serve the uh, the students, the need to they they don't really care what the technology is. They, to them it's all the same as long as it works. That's what's critical, and how we get there really doesn't matter.
Correct. They're not going to care what the label is on the touch panel or what model projector we're using or processor, or if you're using Python or C sharp or C, they can care less. They just want it to work. And so that working is also not just, yes, when they're hitting the button, it does what it's supposed to do, but also, okay, something is not doing what it's doing. What, how long does it take to get it back to that point? So if the support aspect of it, like I was saying, is if your team knows brand A very well and they can get a room up and running in 2 minutes because they know brand A, and you change to brand B and takes you 5 minutes, there's a big different hidden cost there to get that room up and rolling. And especially in classroom, like this is the way I kind of sum it up is every student is a dollar figure. And when you talk about dollar figures, people start understanding. So you can say, let's even say it's a 30 kids in a classroom. They're paying $1,000 a class. That's 30 grand sitting in a classroom. 10 minutes down, you just wasted 30 grand, 10 minutes while you try to fix that equipment, which is a lot more costs there. Where you can say, okay, I can, we may lose 30 grand for 2 minutes instead of 10 minutes. So even if you say 30 grand for every minute they're sitting there, 60 grand or 300 grand, like where's that value adds up, especially in management aspect and I. So when you can put everything to dollar figures, it's good. So you got to look at all the surface costs and the hidden costs when evaluating new coding language, products, anything.
And so if I turn that conversation around a little bit, because you bring up a really good point, and I think all of those kind of argue to the fact that don't make changes in haste, and being loyal is probably better because you know what you know, and you don't have to worry about the learning curve and the unknowns. But the other side of the argument can be maybe going in, there should be a plan in place where there's maybe two or three go-to solutions that can be always chosen from, rather than being stuck uh, tied to one, because the risk of that kind of comes back to what happens if something goes wrong and you can't get it. And I'm not promoting the fact that we need to make these changes, but it's something that I think is being brought to light very much right now. It also brings up the other argument of, do we is it really now time to start to look toward those more universal solutions, that you have different options of being able to use hardware to do the same thing, and from a programming perspective it all kind of stays the same. So it's going back to our conversations about using modern programming languages and more mainstream IT solutions.
If our listeners listen to the little rant I had when Larry was on here, of a little pet peeve, like I mentioned, if I was using a Dell computer and Larry was using an HP computer and we couldn't have this podcast recording with him, people will have lost their minds. But we accept it in AV. Like if I want to use brand A and I can't get brand A, so let's throw brand B in there with a mixer of brand A. You can't do that. Like that really is a pet peeve of mine. I feel that's where even Larry mentioned, where IT is gonna, these big IT companies are gonna step in and they're gonna get interoperable, true interoperable, and these big AV companies who are dragging their feet and saying you can only play in our sandbox are going to lose. Because the IT is going to be like, well, we'll play in everyone's sandbox. We set standards, we set protocols, and you follow these standards and you follow these protocols. The OSI model. I mean, every Dell computer, every HP, every IBM, if you're using Linux or using Windows, they're all using special protocols to communicate with each other. Like example, it's even go down to software level of email. If I wanted to send Steve an email and I'm using Gmail and he's using Yahoo, and I can't send him email because I'm on Gmail and he's on Yahoo, there's a problem there. That's why we need the interoperable. We need to be able to work between them. And going to the evaluation, yeah, you're right. We can't be locked into one company, one way of doing things. We got to be worried about the hidden costs, like I'm mentioning. That's why sandbox are very important, because you can minimize those hidden costs by setting up a sandbox environment. You're not wasting your students' tuition while you're trying to fix a classroom, because you can throw things into a sandbox, run your code, test different languages, test this different hardware, train your employees on that hardware. And then when you put it out into production, then they know, and they can be multiple trained in, brand X, brand Y, brand Z.
I think, I mean, that's an awesome point. Is it's organizations need to be thinking ahead in terms of having and evaluating at all times, and becoming more of an expert and giving themselves an opportunity to make the mistakes and learn from them. But going back to what you mentioned before, and I think it's really important, we were heading down this road for some time with HTML5 and other means, these are all technologies that people know that can run in on different products in different environments, and they're not tied to a particular brand or type of hardware. It's it all is HTML5 compatible. And I guess one more point before we wrap up is that if we wrote code in one, on a in the normal software environment in one language, and you wrote code in another language, and if those two pieces of software could not communicate, that would be a bad thing. I mean,
Yes.
we would have a lot less of an industry in if that were the case.
Yeah. I mean, we like talking about money here, talking about banking. If we all had to use one bank because they couldn't talk to each other, what happens if that bank goes down? That bank holds you hostage, holds your money hostage because they can do whatever they want because you can't go to anybody else. That's why you have to be able to use and be able to switch and communicate across different standards and different platforms.
Yeah, I really like that. Thank you for pointing that out. And it's a really good way of presenting it. And I think it again speaks to the importance of we need to be pushing manufacturers to get on board with being able to play nicely with others and support more tools and more options so that we can get projects done and not be tied into only one way of doing things. And from a software perspective, that means modern programming languages, and which would open the door, I think, to a lot more people being able to uh, be available to the AV world, because we're not tying ourselves to any proprietary languages or platforms. So that I think that's a good place for us to stop. And I'm sure that this is going to be a bit of a polarizing discussion. So I hope that our audience will reach out and let us know what you think and help to join in this conversation. We're happy if you agree, and we're also happy if you disagree. That's what makes this important and makes the community powerful. So please reach out and connect with us. James, how can people get in touch with you, continue the conversation, and also learn more about what you're up to?
As always, you can Google me on the internet and you'll find me. Twitter, AV_James King, Sunday morning with AV in the AM. I'm writer for the Higher Ed Digital Magazine, the IT and AV column. HEPMA, anything HEPMA going on, you'll find me.
Excellent. And for me, you can reach me at Steve Greenblatt on social media. Writing wise, I write with AV Network and Commercial Integrator, and my company blog at controlconcepts.net. And also host State of Control on avnation.tv, so you could check that show out as well. And please continue to reach out and let us know what you think and provide feedback, share an episode. You could find this podcast on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as YouTube. And we want to continue to grow the community. So reach out to your fellow programmers or people who want to learn more about programming, and please share this episode or your favorite one. So that's what we have for today. And this has been Ask the Programmer.